Amazon's AWS. And these are just some examples. OpenAI isn't even the only company involved in these sort of circular deals. But at the center of a lot of these deals has been NVIDIA, the one who so far has profited the most from the AI gold rush. It seems like they're investing that dragon's hoard in any AI company that pops its head up, with there being recent announcements around investments in Intel, Nscale, Wave, and even Nokia, which I'm guessing they're looking to make their chips indestructible.
Bro, I did not even know Nokia even existed anymore.
Actually, could be a smart move. But it's led to concerns that the so-called pick and shovel seller is actually just paying gold miners to buy its picks and shovels and effectively propping up the space. Now, to be clear, the arrows in this chart aren't dollar for dollar arrangements, so the circle analogy isn't a perfect one. But it could mean that NVIDIA is overstating its profits. After all, if you're investing in your customers to give them the cash they need to buy your chips, then you're effectively selling your products at a discount without recognizing the hit to your profit margin, since investments aren't factored into the margin calculation. And someone pointed out that this type of vendor financing became very popular with companies like Nortel towards the end of the dot-com bubble. Not to mention that with us seeing AI companies starting to borrow billions of dollars to buy these chips and even putting their current chips up for collateral for some of these loans, it's led to, again, this concern of this propping up of demand beyond what's sustainable. And amid this massive build out and the deals being made in the space, there's a question about whether there will actually be enough demand from end users to justify all these investments. Bain & Company, for example,
there
estimates
won't.
that AI companies will need $2 trillion.
Okay, here's a question. If the end user base cannot justify the investments that all of these companies are making, what's the catch? They wouldn't be making all these investments if they didn't. They're not stupid. It's not a. People are saying it's a Ponzi scheme. I just agreed with somebody that said it was a Ponzi scheme, but I don't know if it's a Ponzi scheme. They cannot be that stupid, right? I mean, because what's the end goal with the Ponzi scheme? Hold on. I just want to make sure I have the definition of a Ponzi scheme correct. Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent investment operation where early investors are paid returns with money from new investors, not actual profits from a legitimate business, creating an illusion of success that inevitably collapses when the money dries up, and the operator often flees with the funds. Named after Charles Ponzi. Okay. These schemes rely on a constant influx of new money to pay off old investors, making it seem like a highly profitable venture. Okay. Here's what I think about that. I think that these companies are far too. I don't think I'm giving them too much credit here when I say that they're too smart to make that dumb of a mistake. They are not going to invest all of this money just for it to be a scheme, because then we will really eat the rich, if you know what I mean. Then we will really be pissed. No. They've got it all wrong. They are not investing just to run off with all the money. They're not spending all this money just to encourage investors to spend more money so they can run off with it. That's not what's going on here. What is going on is they're spending all this money. They're not stupid. They're spending all this money and investing in each other with the guarantee that we, as the consumer, are going to eat this crap. We're going to eat it up. We're going to become so reliant on it we've outsourced our intelligence. All right, we've outsourced our ability to think for ourselves using AI. AI is just an outsourcing technology. Maps were a classic example of outsourcing directional, like intuition of direction. Maps established, we didn't have to remember directions anymore once we had maps. We don't have to think for ourselves anymore once we have AI. It is the technology of the future. And this is a bubble and it will burst, but they're ready for it. They're counting on the consumer. They're investing all this money not to lose it, but to get it back. It's not a Ponzi scheme. They're not just going to run off with the money. It's not that simple. No. No. No, 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 no.
In annual revenue by 2030 to be profitable, which, as noted by the Wall Street Journal, is more than the 2024 revenue of Microsoft, Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, and Nvidia.
Good
combined,
Lord, that is insane.
5 times more than the entire software as a service market. And there just doesn't seem to be a path towards that type of profitability. Yes, 88% of companies are using AI in their workflows to some capacity.
Sure.
And OpenAI itself has seen remarkable user growth. You might remember that ChatGPT broke records in terms of being the fastest growing app, and the company now boasts 800 million weekly active users.
See?
But only up to 6% of these users are estimated to be paying for this service. And the majority of companies using AI.
And why? Why? Why are only 5 to 6% paying for AI? Why is that the case? Why are they making AI free? Well, it's stupid. They seem to be wasting money. No. No. This is the high interest rate credit card. This is the intro to something bigger. This is the free sample of nicotine that gets the user hooked. And once they're hooked, they will pay for more eventually. There will eventually come a paywall. It's happened with Netflix. It's happened with gaming. It's happened with every subscription service imaginable. Dude, it's happened with YouTube. Remember when YouTube was ad-free? Way back when? And they started putting just a few ads here and there on videos. And then they put more ads, and then they put more ads. Oh, now you can subscribe to Premium to have no ads. Hulu. No ads to begin with. Just a small subscription. I'm pretty sure it was just a small subscription. No ads. Oh, well, we might put an ad here, or just here and there. Just place it. They get you hooked, and then they start making money once you can't live without it. They start making money once they know that they've got you and that you can't live without their product. That is what's going on here.
Around 61%, according to McKinsey, currently don't see an enterprise impact on earnings before interest and taxes. And Citigroup earlier this year estimated that AI revenue would only reach $43 billion in 2025 and $780 billion
Oh my God.
by 2030, which still represents pretty remarkable growth at 80% a year. But it's less than half of what Bain estimated would be needed for the industry to break even. And that's all assuming the AI companies are able to deliver on what they're promising. There's also the question of the bottlenecks we're seeing for space, with the key one being electricity. Building a grid infrastructure takes years of planning and development, and that's assuming you get through all the regulatory hurdles of bringing online more fossil fuel or even renewable plants, which don't always provide the consistent electricity needed for data centers. And while nuclear power plants have been a popular choice for data center powering, in the US, the NRC application review process can take 5 years alone to complete, with construction often taking another 5 or more years, according to the US EIA's own website, which might be longer than these companies are able to woo investors. It's even led to some companies like XAI skirting regulations to set up on-site generators to try and meet their electricity demand. Then there's a consideration around the lifetime of the data center hardware itself. Over the last few years, large tech firms have been expanding the assumed lifetime of its servers, spreading out their accounting costs over a 4 to 6 year period, whereas some have argued that with Nvidia releasing updated, faster chips every year, the amount of time before these chips have to be replaced is actually much shorter. Which means that many of these companies are going to run into higher.
There is another factor. All of this technology that they're investing in is going to be outdated in a very short period of time. A shorter period of time than they're probably prepared for. Like seriously, they're building these data centers that are going to take 5 years just to get all the paperwork done. and approved, and then it's going to take 5 more years after breaking ground to build these power plants. So now we are 10 years. They're already buying up all the freaking NVIDIA graphics cards and AMD graphics cards, right? And by the time they get all this crap built, they're going to be in the market for new graphics cards. New and better. Okay. But again, they're not that stupid. So what's the catch?
Their replacement costs, then they're disclosing to investors. And when you throw in the sheer scale and concentration of the AI industry, with 35 to 36 companies accounting for 99% of all AI token spending, 2 companies buying nearly 40% of NVIDIA's chips, and 10 companies, most of which are involved with AI, accounting for 40% of the S&P 500, the failure of any one of these companies could lead to fairly big shockwaves, not just in the space, but even the markets as a whole.
Yes,
Not to
it
mention
will.
the real estate, utility companies, and financing firms all involved
Oh
in the
my
industry.
God.
And OpenAI
Dude.
alone has
This is freaking huge. He just mentioned something
a
there.
lot of the market.
He mentioned, dude, there is so much more involved in this than just AI, than just the graphics cards. Just the graphics card market, that's what we're worried about right now, but there is so much more involved in this. This is real estate, like he said. This is warehouses. If this crap fails, there is going to be an enormous fallout to be dealt with. There is going to be enormous vacancies in warehouses. There's going to be all these data centers that are going to have to be paid. They're still going to have to be paid for somehow. And who do you think's going to pay for them? Who do you think's going to pay for them? You and I. So we're screwed if it works, and we're screwed if it doesn't. At this very moment, we are all screwed if this works or if it doesn't. Either way. Folks, we're gonna have to prepare. We're gonna have to prepare for this fallout, because it's going to happen either way. I don't mean to be a fearmonger. I don't like to be that way. Personally, I hate it. I like to be more positive most of the time. But you know what? I gotta call it how I see it. And this is not gonna end well either way. For humanity. For the average person. Oh my god. There's somebody over there. None of this is going to end well for the average consumer. None of it. It's just that simple.
Its weight seemingly on its shoulders at the moment. OpenAI's deal announcements have added hundreds of billions of dollars to the market value of companies like Broadcom, Nvidia, and AMD. If we see a pullback in that company, it's going to hurt valuations for many of these businesses, especially when you consider how expensive many of these companies have become, with investors pricing these stocks for perfection, leaving very little room for disappointing results. So yeah, it's easy to see where the comparison with the dot-com bubble comes from. In fact, if you lump in software, computers, and peripheral equipment, and other information processing equipment, the current private domestic investment in IT as a percentage of GDP is back where it was during the dot-com bubble. And what's important is that you can still see losses in the market even if the technology proves to be promising. The internet did, of course, revolutionize our lives, but also led to an 80% collapse of the NASDAQ over 2.5 years, as thousands of shaky dot-com startups convinced investors that they were on the frontier of a new, highly profitable business that ultimately would only actually benefit a few players. So it brings us back to the question, are we truly in for dot-com 2.0? Well, while there are, of course, parallels with a new technology, investor enthusiasm, and concerns that things are overvalued, there are also a number of differences that make for a very different setup here.
Bro, I did
For one,
not know
there's
that would do.
valuations. Yes, the CAPE ratio, a commonly cited measure of stock market valuations, is fast approaching the highs we saw during the dot-com bubble, with the cyclically adjusted PE ratio measuring the difference between a stock's price and how much money the company is actually earning. So how much investors are willing to pay
I'm dead.
per dollar of earnings per share effectively.
I'm dead.
However, it's important to note that with the CAPE ratio specifically, It does
I'm dead.
include smoothing, meaning that the earnings put less
It's
weight
over.
on any sort of
God dang
surge
it, bro.
in profits we see. If you use a more basic trailing PE ratio for the S&P 500, which only considers earnings over the last 12 months, you can see that the current ratio sits at roughly 30 times, which yes, is still high on a historical basis, but it compares to the dot-com bubble where we reached a high of 46 times. So we aren't yet at the same extended level of valuation. Which brings us to the second point, which is that compared to the dot-com bubble, there's actually strong financials and earnings to back up many of these valuations. Morgan Stanley, for example, has highlighted that S&P 500 companies are generating 3 times the cash flow as a share of their valuations versus what they were generating leading up to 2000. And on a relative basis, there are nearly half as many unprofitable technology companies when compared to 2000, when 36% of tech companies were losing money. Now, this doesn't account for private companies like OpenAI or Anthropic, which are highly unprofitable, but these startups have the backing of companies that are highly profitable
Yes.
and are generally viewed as financial strongholds. Many of these big tech companies have very little debt and hordes of cash on hand that they've accumulated over the decade. So there is some evidence that leverage is slowly creeping up in the space, which could lead to some problems if that continues. Currently, a lot of the spending has been backed by cash on hand or cash flows from these large companies, which does limit the fallout if we see one of these investments not ultimately pan out. I also want to highlight a few considerations when it comes to the circular dealings in the AI space. And this is not to really defend these companies or argue that there's not something, kind of prop uppy going on here. But when it comes to NVIDIA specifically, it kind of makes sense that this is the approach they're taking. Companies like NVIDIA are making so much money that it can be difficult to find places to park that capital without dragging down the company's performance. So
That's true. They literally have way too much money. Far too much money than they know what to do with.
It makes sense that NVIDIA would invest in the ecosystem that will ultimately benefit its future demand. If the companies it invests in are able to succeed with that investment, then that means that they are effectively incubating a future customer. It's also not where most of their cash flows are coming from. The company over the last 12 months made $77 billion in operating cash flow.
They're creating a market. Okay. Oh my God. They are banking on AI working. They are banking on the success of AI so hard that they are creating customers out of entire companies. The average consumer is not enough. They have to create customers out of companies. They have so much freaking money that they literally can't keep making more at the rate. Oh my God, dude, they can't keep making money at the rate that they promise investors. Like the line has to keep going up. And they've discovered that it's gone up as far as it's going to go up with average consumers. They've jacked the prices as far as they can. And they've seen that the cap has been reached. Like nobody can buy this crap anymore. So what did they do? They created AI. They created AI that a product that is palatable to consumers, that is attractive to consumers, that is usable, it's the meta tool. It is the meta tool for the average person, right? They've conditioned us to mindlessly scroll. Now that our brain power is gone, we require a tool to think for us. We have to outsource our ability to think. In comes AI. In comes AI, the savior of all. The thinker, don't worry, you don't have to learn any new skills, because any skill that you need, you can just have AI do it for you, essentially. There's no need to have a brain when you can outsource it to AI. You can use your brain to harvest dopamine. That's all this is to them, is a dopamine farm. So that you'll stick to their apps. And then they made AI not only, oh my God. Okay, just let me lay it out. The entire goal of these companies, they knew that the line would cap. They knew that the line would stop eventually. The line meaning their profits getting higher every year. They knew that line would stop eventually. So what did they do? They created an entirely new market by creating customers out of companies. And I'm speaking of NVIDIA specifically. They knew that they could no longer keep that line going with the average consumer consuming their product. It's just not feasible. So what did they do? AI came along. It was the meta tool, marketed as the meta tool. We use it every day. So what do we need? We need computing power. We need GPUs and CPUs. Suddenly, there are what did it say? Like 458 different little companies of little AI startups. And there are like 7 or 8 major AI players in this nuclear arms race of AI, a new AI Cold War, all competing for one another's seat at the top. And what do they all need? More graphics cards, more CPUs. Thus, NVIDIA's line keeps going up. Shareholders are happy. Everybody's happy. Everybody's making more money. Until they're not. And that's why they claim this is a bubble. But again, it's not. It's not. They have a plan. This is the free trial. This is the free trial. We are being used as testing grounds. We are the test subjects right now. So you can be fairly certain, actually 100% certain, that at some point in the near future, once everybody has become reliant, once everybody has adopted AI, once it has become integrated into culture, they will yank the rug out from under the consumer's feet once again. Paywall, 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 paywall. Want more AI features? Paywall, paywall, paywall. You don't want ads in your Neuralink? Paywall, paywall. Now that's a bit extreme, but you understand what I'm saying. It's inevitable. It's gonna happen. It's just a matter of time.
And paid out $24 billion in investing cash flow, of which a fraction would be this sort of vendor financing. And while there are larger financing deals set up with OpenAI for the future, for example, It's important to note that many of these arrangements are performance-based, which makes sense given that there is this perception that OpenAI may be faking it till it makes it, that it's kind of talking out of its ass with with these large deals that it's making, given again just the scale of these deals relative to its current revenues. But the point is, NVIDIA isn't just writing blank checks, with, according to Bank of America, vendor financing only representing a fraction of current AI spending. It's also worth noting that bubbles don't tend to just pop on their own, and part of the reason we saw the dot-com bubble deflate was actually fairly rampant fraud in the space. Many large companies were discovered to have been cooking their books to meet higher and higher investor expectations. And well, yes, fraud is certainly possible today.
They learned they were cooking their books in the dot-com bubble, and they eventually got found out because they were trying to prove to investors that they were still making money, making more money. So they were cooking their books. But I truly think that they learned from their mistakes, and that is a thing of the past. I'm not for certain on that. It could be fraud. They could be cooking the books. It could all be a Ponzi scheme, like he's saying. But I think they got smart and figured out a way to actually sell a product, to actually put their money where their mouth is, to actually be able to back up what they're saying. Because we think the rug's been pulled out now. No. We might be on the ground, but there's another rug. They're going to pull it out from under us, and they're going to kick us while we're down. That didn't make any sense, but you get it.
But we have seen reporting standards improve since the 2000 dot-com bubble because of these crises. We're also in a very different economic environment, for better or for worse, mind you, with rising interest rates often being cited as a factor that killed the dot-com bubble, whereas currently we have the Federal Reserve seemingly putting rates on a downwards trajectory. And with all this, it's important to acknowledge that we could very well see OpenAI's profits scale from here. Again, as a private company, we don't get much of an insight into the firm's financials. But with the company launching new services and many businesses looking to lay off employees to integrate more AI into their workflows, there is a chance the company is able to build its revenue. In fact, just as I was finishing up this video, it came out that Sam Altman expects the company to reach $20 billion in run rate revenue for 2025 and hundreds of billions by 2030.
That's
albeit
insane.
They're still expected to be unprofitable in the near term. Now, I don't know if that's how things are going to play out, but companies who invest in firms like OpenAI do get more insight than we have from the outside. And yes, companies make bad investments sometimes. We aren't today living in the metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg desperately hoped we would be. But assuming that
Yeah, that was a pretty significant flop. That was a pretty significant flop on Zuck's part. TBH.
all these players are being perfectly irrational is just as dangerous as assuming that they're all being perfectly rational. Now, with all that being said, I do think there's a bubble of some sort. To be clear, this is not to downplay the very lofty valuations we have, the risk of a correction here. It's just to try and distinguish between a crisis and markets being disappointed with how certain investments play out. It is true that with high valuations, there's little room for error, and that leads to lower expected returns for investors. It's also true that the current investment activity is just blatantly unsustainable when you consider all the AI activity going on. We're also seeing many big tech companies lay off employees, which some are pointing to as evidence that capital spending and slowing economic performance are impacting operations.
Yeah.
And we've seen signs of strain on market liquidity, which just means that investors might be less willing to lend that money to these AI startups in the future. It is also likely that we'll see a consolidation of the space similar to what we saw with the dot-com bubble. The truth is we just don't have enough demand for 500 AI unicorns. And in fact, there's a lot of good research that highlights that technological revolutions have historically been bad investments on average.
That is true. That is true. Smaller companies, they're not going to get the investments they need to survive because, you know, way back when there are only a handful of computer companies that are actually making it. And there were tons of companies way back in the, like when computers started being manufactured, there were a ton of companies that did not survive. It was like Apple, whatever, Apple, Microsoft, Lenovo, IBM eventually died, but Dell, you know, you just have a very select few that survived. And the same thing's probably going to happen here. You're going to have OpenAI, Meta, DeepSeek, whatever. You're going to have those, that handful that survives out of this. And there's going to be, like he's already saying, there's hundreds of companies that are AI startups that are just simply not going to make it because there won't be any demand. They're trying to be the next Mark Zuck, but it's already happened. There's no way.
Given that they tend to lead to this boom and bust in market prices, and the attrition experienced by all the companies throwing their names in the hat has a negative impact on market returns, even if the technology goes on to be successfully adopted. And as companies like Netscape perfectly highlighted during the dot-com bubble, being the market leader during the technology's rollout doesn't guarantee that leadership spot in the future.
No, it doesn't.
If you've never heard
Ask IBM.
of Netscape
IBM.
before, kind of perfectly illustrates the point. But the point is, we just don't know yet. AI is a new technology that could prove very promising and could lead to a lot of profits for these companies.
Though, along with that point, if you're at the top, IBM got complacent. IBM got complacent because they were selling computers, so they didn't see a need to innovate. And that's when everybody else caught up and passed them with flying colors, actually. And then IBM was stuck in the mud because there was no R&D. Like, there is always an incentive for the little guy, and there are always people rooting for the little guy. So that's not to say that you know, some of these companies might not get complacent and screw their chances by doing so in the future, in the long run. So I don't know. But yeah, that's how if you're at the top, it's easy to get complacent, and it's easy to fall back, to stop innovating. So,
or demand just might never meet the high expectations that companies like OpenAI ultimately have. We could be in for a Metaverse 2.0. I would think this is probably a little more promising than that, but you get my point. Not to mention that at any point we could have a geopolitical event, a headline, a new development that completely changes what we were expecting to happen. And even if we are ultimately in a bubble, timing such a thing is near impossible. Alan Greenspan, for example, the federal chair at the time, called out the irrational exuberance of dot-com companies back in December of 1996, over 3 years before the bubble would ultimately collapse. And with companies like Meta viewing the risk of underinvesting as higher than the risk of overinvesting, these rallies can ultimately last as long as investors are willing to pile money into the space. Yes, at some point these companies will have to transition from surviving on investor funds to earning customer revenues to fund their operations. But
there it is. At some point, these guys are going to they're going to have to stop relying on each other, sucking each other off, and they're going to have to get somebody to do it for them. They're going to have to find a girlfriend, so to speak. They're going to have to stop relying on investors, investment companies, and they're going to start having to rely on customer revenue by pulling the rug, by introducing paywalls. Several of them already have premium versions. It's not far-fetched, and it's not far-fetched to say that it's going to be another YouTube situation. It's going to be another Netflix situation where all of a sudden you have 4 different subscription tiers, where one with ads, one with 1080p, one with 4K, one with all of your shows, one with half of your shows. What are we supposed to do with this? It's inevitable. It is inevitable. And we're going to eat it up. We're just going to pay for it. We're going to pay for it. Whether we like to say that we are going to, whether we like to say we're not going to, the masses will follow. the masses will follow. It's always the case. It just simply is always the case until somebody stands up. But it's so tough to do that these days without living in fear of, fear of the man, because I don't know what I'm talking about, but let's
How
keep
long of a
watching.
timeline we face until that has to happen remains to be seen. So hopefully you found this video helpful. As
Yeah.
always, it's important to
Yeah, we don't know when that's going to happen. We don't know when these guys are going to have to stop relying on each other, on all these investment companies to keep investing in their product without, relying on customer revenue. There's going to come a point where they're going to have to start relying on customers. There's going to come a point when they're going to start having to sell their product. They're going to start selling their product, and it's going to be, well, I don't know, because we're still really relatively, we're still in the early to mid days of the development of AI. I believe that we're still in the early stages. And yeah, they might hype it up a little bit to make it seem to the investors like AI is maybe a little further along than it actually is. So we might be in even earlier days than I'm thinking. I foresee it taking, oh geez, I don't know. I foresee it taking at least 2.5 years for this thing to go completely haywire, off the wall. I gave it 2.5 years. So do with this what you will. I think I'm done for tonight. It's 4 a.m. here. I'm tired. I didn't plan on streaming this long, but I had a good time, and I hope you guys had a good time as well. I'll probably see y'all tomorrow night. So it's the weekend. I'm gonna have a good one, and you guys have a good weekend as well. If I don't see you, I'll see you on Sunday or whenever. So thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate your mommy for the follow. Thank you. And I'll get some celebrations on screen whenever there's a follow here soon. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.